Alright, hello. Thank you for coming back, or for coming the first time. If you missed the first part, then you might be a bit lost, but don't feel disheartened because there hasn't been much plot. Most of this book is just, jokes, so if you... I'm sure you'll catch up. But go ahead and watch the first part, and then come back to this later. It's going to be posted as a video when it's finished, so you can come back anytime, or just write Merry Christmas in the chat and come back to us later. I'm just going to get started. We're going to be reading either until my lunch is ready or when the baby wakes up, whichever happens first. So we don't have much time, but we have a lot of book to get through, so I'm trying to find every opportunity possible. So let's get started. It wasn't even a bar. It was just a room where people drank while they waited for other people with whom they had business. The business usually involved the transfer of ownership of something from one person to another. But then, what business doesn't? 5 businessmen sat around a table, lit by a candle stuck in a saucer. There was an open bottle between them. They were taking some care to keep it away from the candle flame. "It's gone 6, said one, a huge man with dreadlocks and a beard you could keep goats in. "The clock struck ages ago. He ain't coming. Let's go." "Sit down, will you? Assassins are always late. 'Cause of style, right?" "This one's mental. Eccentric. What's the difference?" "A bag of cash." The three that hadn't spoken yet looked at one another. "What's this? You never said he was an assassin," said Chickenwire. "He never said the guy was an assassin, did he, Banjo?" There was a sound like distant thunder. It was Banjo Lily-White clearing his throat. "That's right," said a voice from the upper slopes. "You's never said." The others waited until the rumble died away. Even Banjo's voice hulked. The first proper speaker waved his hand vaguely, trying to get across the point that someone was a hamper of food, several folding chairs, a tablecloth, an assortment of cooking gear, and an entire colony of ants short of a picnic. "Mental. He's got a funny eye." "It's just glass, all right," said the one known as Cat's Eye, signalling a waiter for the 4 beers and a glass of milk. "And he's paying $10,000 each. I don't care what kind of eye he's got." "I heard it was made of the same stuff they make fortune-telling crystals out of. You can't tell me that's right. And he looks at you with it," said the first speaker. He was known as Peachy, although no one had ever found out why. Cat's Eye sighed. Certainly there was something odd about Mr. Teatime. There was no doubt about that, but there was something weird about all assassins. And the man paid well. Lots of assassins used informers and locksmiths. It was against the rules, technically, but standards were going down everywhere, weren't they? Usually they paid you late and sparsely, as if they were doing you a favour. But Teatime was okay. True, after a few minutes talking to him, your eyes began to water and you felt the needed a scrub to scrub your skin, even on the inside. But no one was perfect, were they? Peachy leaned forward. "You know what?" he said. "I reckon he could be here, actually, in disguise, laughing at us. Well, if he's in here laughing at us..." He cracked his knuckles. Medium Dave Lillywhite, the last of the 5, looked around. I'm just shutting my phone down. Oh god, why is this so difficult? Okay. Medium Dave Lillywhite, the last of the 5, looked around. There were indeed a number of solitary figures in the low, dark room. Most of them wore cloaks and big hoods. They sat alone in corners hidden by the hoods. None of them looked very friendly. "Don't be daft, Peachy," Cat's Eye murmured. "That's the sort of thing they do," Peachy insisted. "They're masters of disguise." "With that eye of his?" "That guy sitting by the fire has got an eye patch," said Medium Dave. Medium Dave didn't speak much. He watched a lot. The others turned to stare. "He'll wait till we're off our guard, then go, ah ha ha ha," said Peachy. "They can't kill you unless it's for money," said Cat's Eye. But now there was a soupçon of doubt in his voice. They kept their eyes on the hooded man. He kept his eye on them. If asked to describe what they did for a living, the 5 men around the table would have said something like, this and that, or the best I can. Although in Banjo's case, he'd have probably said, duh. They were, by the standards of an uncaring society, criminals, although they wouldn't have thought of themselves as such and couldn't even spell words like nefarious. What they generally did was move things around. Sometimes the things were on the wrong side of the steel door, say, or in the wrong house. Sometimes the things were in fact people who were far too unimportant to trouble some Assassin's Guild with, but who were nevertheless inconveniently positioned where they were and could much better be located on, for example, a seabed somewhere. None of the 5 belonged to any formal guild, and they generally found their clients among those people who, for their own dark reasons, didn't want to put the guild to any trouble, sometimes because they were guild members themselves. They had plenty of work. There was always something needed transferring from A to B, or, of course, to the bottom of the sea. That's spelt with a letter C if you're not reading along. Any minute now, said Peachy, as the waiter brought the beers. Banjo cleared his throat. This was a sign that another thought had arrived. What I don't understand, he said, is... Yes, said his brother. What I don't understand is, how long has this place had waiters? Good evening, said Mr. Teatime, putting down the tray. They stared at him in silence. He gave them a friendly smile. Peachy's huge hand slapped the table. You crept up on us, you little... he began. Men in their line of business develop a certain prescience. Medium Dave and Cat's Eye, who were sitting on either side of Peachy, leaned away nonchalantly. Hi, said Teatime. There was a blur, and a knife shuddered into the table between Peachy's thumb and index finger. He looked down at it in horror. My name's Teatime, he said. Which one are you? I'm Peachy, said Peachy, still staring at the vibrating knife. That's an interesting name, said Teatime. Why are you called Peachy, Peachy? Medium Dave coughed. Peachy looked up into Teatime's face. The glass eye was a mere ball of faintly glowing grey. The other eye was a little dot in a sea of white. Peachy's only contact with intelligence had been to beat it up and rob it whenever possible, but a sudden sense of self-preservation glued him into his chair. "'Cause I don't shave," he said. "Peachy don't like blades, mister," said Cat's Eye. "And do you have a lot of friends, Peachy?" said Teatime. "Got a few, yeah." With a sudden whirl of movement that made the men start, Teatime spun away, grabbed a chair, swung it up to the table, and sat down. 3 of them had already got their hands on their swords. I don't have many, he said apologetically. Don't seem to have the knack. On the other hand, I don't seem to have any enemies at all. Not one. Isn't that nice? Teatime had been thinking, in the cracking, buzzing firework display that was in his head. What he had been thinking about was immortality. He might have been quite insane, but he was no fool. There were, in the Assassin's Guild, a number of paintings and busts of famous members who had, in the past, no, of course, that wasn't right. There were paintings and busts of famous clients of members, with a noticeably modest brass plaque screwed somewhere nearby, bearing some unassuming little comment like, "Departed this vale of tears on Grune 3, year of the Sideways Leech, with the assistance of Honourable K.W. Dobson, Viper House." Many fine old educational establishments had dignified memorials in some hall, listing the old boys who had laid down their lives for monarch and country. The guilds was very similar, except for those question of whose life had been lain. Every guild member wanted to be up there somewhere, because getting up there represented immortality, and the bigger your client, the more incredibly discreet and restrained would be the little brass plaque, so that everybody couldn't help but notice your name. In fact, if you were very, very renowned, they wouldn't even have to write down your name at all. The men around the table watched him. It was only hard to know what Banjo was thinking, or even if he was thinking at all, but the other 4 were thinking along the lines of, "Bumptious little tit, like all assassins. Thinks he knows it all. I could have him down one-handed, no trouble. But you hear stories. Those eyes give me the creeps. So what's the job? Said Chicken Wire. We don't do jobs, said Tea Time. We perform services, and the service will earn each of you $10,000. That's a lot more than the Thieves Guild's rate, said Medium Dave. I've never liked the Thieves Guild, said Tea Time, without turning his head. Why not? They ask too many questions. We don't ask questions, said Chicken Wire quickly. We shall suit one another perfectly, said Tea Time. Do have another drink while we wait for our other members of our little troop. Chicken Wire saw Medium Dave's lips part to frame the opening letters "Who." These letters he deemed inauspicious at the time. He kicked Medium Dave's leg under the table. The door opened slightly. A figure came in, but only just. It inserted itself in the gap and sidled along the wall in a manner calculated not to attract attention. Calculated, that is, by someone not good at this sort of calculation. It looked over and turned over its upturned collar. That's a wizard, said Peachy. The figure hurried over and dragged up a chair. No, I'm not, it hissed. I'm incognito. Right, Mr. Nito, said Medium Dave. You're just someone in a pointy hat. This is my brother Banjo, that's Peachy, and this is Chick. The wizard looked desperately at Tea Time. I didn't want to come. Mr. Sidney here is indeed a wizard, said Tea Time. A student, anyway, but down on his luck at the moment, hence his willingness to join us on this venture. Exactly how far down on his luck, said Medium Dave. The wizard tried not to meet anyone's gaze. I made a misjudgment to do with a wager, he said. Lost a bet, you mean? Said Chicken Wire. I paid up on time, said Sidney. Yes, but Cryoprace, the doll, has this odd little thing about money that turns into lead the next day, said Tea Time cheerfully. So our friend needs to earn a little cash, in a hurry, and in a climate where arms and legs stay on. No one said anything about there being magic in all this, said Peachy. Our destination is, probably you shouldn't think of it as something like a wizard's tower, gentlemen, said Tea Time. It isn't an actual wizard's tower, is it? Said Medium Dave. They've got a very odd sense of humour when it comes to booby traps. No. Guards? I believe so, according to legend, but nothing very much. Medium Dave narrowed his eyes. There's valuable stuff in this tower. Oh, yes. Why aren't there any guards, then? The person who owns the property probably does not realise the value of what they have. Locks, said Medium Dave. On our way, we shall be picking up a locksmith. Who? Mr. Brown. They nodded. Everyone, at least everyone in the business. And everyone in the business knew what the business was. And if you didn't know what the business was, you weren't a businessman, knew Mr. Brown. His presence anywhere around a job gave it a certain kind of respectability. He was a neat, elderly man who invented most of the tools in his big leather bag. No matter what cunning you used to get into a place, or overcome a small army, or find the secret treasure room, sooner or later you sent for Mr. Brown, who'd turn up with his leather bag, and his little springy things, and his little bottles of strange alchemy, and his little neat books. And he'd do nothing for 10 minutes but look at the lock, and then he'd select a piece of bent metal from a ring of several hundred almost identical pieces, and under an hour later he'd be walking away with a neat 10% of the takings. Of course, you didn't have to use Mr. Brown's services. You could always opt to spend the rest of your life looking at the locked door. All right, where is this place? Said Peachy. Tea Time turned and smiled at him. If I'm paying you, why isn't it me who's asking the questions? Peachy didn't even try to outstare the glass eye a second time. Just want to be prepared, that's all, he mumbled. Good reconnaissance is in the essence of a successful operation, said Tea Time. He turned and looked up at the bulk that was Banjo and added, What is this? This is Banjo, said Medium Dave, rolling himself a cigarette. Does it do tricks? Time stood still for a moment. The other men looked at Medium Dave. He was well known in Ankh-Morpork's professional underclass as a thoughtful, patient man, and considered something of an intellectual because of some of his tattoos were spelled right. He was reliable in a tight spot, and above all, he was honest, because good criminals have to be honest. If he had a fault, it was a tendency to deal out terminal and definitive retribution to anyone who said anything about his brother. If he had a virtue, it was a tendency to pick his time. Medium Dave's fingers tucked the tobacco into the paper and raised it to his lips. No, he said. Chicken Wire tried to defrost the conversation. He's not what you could call bright, but he's always useful. He can lift 2 men in each hand, by their necks. Yup, said Banjo. He looks like a volcano, said Tea Time. Really? Said Medium Dave Lillywhite. Chicken Wire reached out hastily and pushed him back down into his seat. Tea Time turned and smiled at him. I do so hope we're going to be friends, Mr. Medium Dave, he said. It really hurts to think I might not be among friends. He gave him another bright smile. Then he turned back to the rest of the table. Are we resolved then, gentlemen? They nodded. There was some reluctance given the consensus view that Tea Time belonged in a room with soft walls, but $10,000 was $10,000, possibly even more. Good, said Tea Time. He looked Banjo up and down. Then I suppose we might as well make a start. He hit Banjo very hard in the mouth. Death in person did not turn up the cessation of every life. He was not necessary. Governments govern, but the prime ministers and presidents do not personally turn up in people's homes to tell them how to run their lives, because of the mortal danger this would present. There are laws instead. But from time to time, Death checked up to see that things were properly functioning, or, to put it another and more accurate way, properly ceasing to function, in the least significant areas of his jurisdiction. And now he walked through dark seas. Silt rose in clouds around his feet, and he strode along the trench bottom. His robes floated around him. There was silence, pressure, and utter, utter darkness. But there was life down here, even this far below the waves. There was giant squid and lobsters with teeth on their eyelids. There were spidery things with their stomachs on their feet, and fish that made their own light. It was a quiet, black nightmare world, but life lives everywhere that life can. And where life can't, this takes a little longer. Death's destination was a slight rise in the trench floor. I'm getting a call. Oh, that's my dad. Sorry, Dad. I'll talk to him later. Where was I? Death's destination was a slight rise in the trench floor. Are you calling me again? Oh. Can I mute this? Maybe I'll just stop. Is that going to work? No, that's still going. What if I... Alright, I'm back. I wasn't it's probably unwise, I wasn't monitoring the chat. No, that's alright, no one's watching anyway. Okay, thank you for waiting. Are we still, okay. We're back, I think. Yeah, the preview looks all good. Where were we? Death's destination was a slight rise in the trench floor. Already the water around him was getting warmer and more populated, but creatures that looked as though they had been put together from bits left over from everything else. Unseen but felt, a vast column of scalding water was welling up from a fissure. Somewhere below were rocks heated to near incandescence by the disk's magical field. Spires of minerals had been deposited around this vent, and in this tiny oasis a type of life had grown up. It did not need air or light. It did not even need food in the way that most other species would understand the term. It just grew at the edge of the streaming column of water, looking like a cross between a worm and a flower. Death kneeled down and peered at it, because it was so small. But for some reason, in this world without eyes or light, it was a brilliant red. The profligacy of life in these matters never ceased to amaze him. He reached inside his robe and pulled out a small roll of black material, like a jeweller's toolkit. With great care he took from one of the pouches a scythe about an inch long and held it expectantly between thumb and forefinger. Somewhere overhead a shard of rock was dislodged by a stray current and tumbled down, raising little puffs of silt as it bounced off the tubes. It landed just beside the living flower, and then rolled, wrenching it from the rock. Death flicked the tiny scythe just as the bloom faded. The omnipotent eyesight of various supernatural entities is often remarked upon. It is said they can see the fall of every sparrow. And this may be true, but there is only one who is always there when it hits the ground. The soul of the tube worm was very small and uncomplicated. It wasn't bothered about sin. It never coveted its neighbour's polyps. It never gambled or drunk strong liquor. It never bothered itself with questions like, why am I here? Because it had no concept at all of here, or, for that matter, of I. Nevertheless, something was cut free under the surgical edge of the scythe and vanished in the rolling waters. Death carefully put an instrument away and stood up. All was well. Things were functioning satisfactorily, but they weren't. In the same way that the best of engineers can hear the tiny change that signals a bearing going bad long before the finest instruments would detect anything wrong, Death picked up a discord in the symphony of the world. It was one wrong note among billions, but all the more noticeable for that, like a tiny pebble in a very large shoe. He waved a finger in the waters. For a moment a blue, door-shaped outline appeared. He stepped through it, and it was gone. The tube creatures didn't notice him. They hadn't noticed him arrive. They never even noticed anything. A cart trundled through the freezing, foggy streets. The driver hunched in his seat. He seemed to be all big, thick brown overcoat. A figure darted out of the swirls and was suddenly on the box next to him. "Hi," it said. "My name's Tea Time. What's yours?" You get down. I ain't allowed to give lit." The driver stopped. It was amazing how Tea Time had been able to burst a knife through 4 layers of thick clothing and stop it just at the point where it pricked the flesh. "Sorry," said Tea Time, smiling brightly. There ain't nothing valuable, nothing valuable, only a few bags of—" "Oh dear," said Tea Time, his face a sudden acre of concern. "Well, we'll just have to see, won't we? What is your name, sir?" "Ernie, Ernie," said Ernie. "Yes, Ernie, Tea Time turned his head slightly. "Come along, gentlemen. This is my friend Ernie. He's going to be our driver for tonight." Ernie saw 6 figures emerge from the fog and climb into the cart behind him. He didn't turned to look at them. By the pricking of his kidneys, he knew this would not be an exemplary career move. But it seemed that one of the figures, a huge shambling mound of a creature, was carrying a long bundle over its shoulder. The bundle moved and made muffled noises. "Do stop shaking, Ernie. We just need a lift," said Tea Time, as the cart rumbled over the cobbles. "Where to, mister?" "Oh, we don't mind. But first, I'd like you to stop at Sator Square, near the second fountain." The knife was withdrawn. Ernie stopped trying to breathe through his ears. What is it? You do seem tense, Ernie. I always find that a neck massage helps." "I ain't rightly allowed to carry passengers, see? Charlie'll give me a right telling off." "Oh, don't worry about that," said Tea Time, slapping him on the back. "We're all friends here." "What are you bringing the girl for?" said the voice behind them. "It's not right hitting girls," said a deep voice. "Our mam said no hitting girls. Only bad boys do that, our mam said." "You be quiet, Banjo." "Our mam said—" "Shh! Ernie here doesn't want to listen to our troubles," said Tea Time, not taking his gaze off the driver. "Me, deaf as a post, me," burbled Ernie, who was in some ways a very quick learner. "Can't hardly see more'n a few feet, neither. Got no recollection for the faces that I do see, come to that. Bad memory. Ha! Talk about bad memory. Course, sometimes I can be like that, like as if it were on the cart talking to people. Ha! Just like I'm talking to you now. And then when they're gone, ha! Try as I might, do you think I can remember anything about them, or how many there were, or what they were carrying, or anything about a girl, or anything?" By this time his voice was high-pitched wheeze. "Ha! Sometimes I forget my own name." "It's Ernie, isn't it?" said Tea Time, giving him a happy smile. "Ah, and here we are. Oh dear, there seems to be some excitement." There was a sound of fighting somewhere ahead, and then a couple of masked trolls ran past the three watchmen after them. With three watchmen after them, they all ignored the cart. "I heard Debris' gang were going to have a go at Pagley's strong room tonight," said the voice behind Ernie. "Looks like Mr. Brown won't be joining us then," said another voice. There was a snigger. "Oh, I don't know about that, Mr. Lillywhite." "I don't know about that at all," said a third voice, and this one was from the direction of the fountain. "Could you take my bag while I climb up, please? Do be careful, it's a little heavy." It was a neat little voice. The owner of a voice like that kept his money in a shovel purse, and always counted his change carefully. Ernie thought all this, and then tried very hard to forget that he had. "On you go, Ernie," said Tea Time. "Round behind the university, I think." As the cart rolled on, the neat little voice said, "You grab all the money, and then you get out very smartly, am I right?" There was a murmur of agreement. "Learned that on Mother's knee, yeah." "You learned a lot of stuff on Ma's knee, Mr. Lillywhite." "Don't you say nothing about our mam." The voice was like an earthquake. "This is Mr. Brown, Banjo. You smarten up." "He didn't ought to talk about our mam." All right, all right. Hello, Banjo. I think I may have a sweet somewhere. Yes, there you are. Yes, your ma knew the way, all right. You go in quietly, you take your time, you get what you came for, and you leave smartly and in good order. You don't hang around at the scene to count it out and tell one another what brave lads you are. Am I right?" "You seem to have done all right, Mr. Brown." The cart rattled towards the other side of the square. "Just a little for expenses, Mr. Cat's-eye. A little hogswatch present, you might say. Never take the lot and run. Take a little and walk. Dress neat. That's my motto. Dress neat and walk away slowly. Never run. Never run. The watch'll always chase a running man. They're like terriers for giving chase. No, you walk out slow. You walk around the corner. You wait till there's a lot of excitement. Then you turn around and walk back. They can't cope with that, see? Half the time they'll stand aside and let you walk past. 'Good evening, officers,' you say, and then you go home for your tea. We gets you out of trouble, I can see that, if you've got the nerve." "Oh no, Mr. Peachy, doesn't get you out of, keeps you out of." It was like a very good schoolroom, Ernie thought, and immediately tried to forget. On a backstreet gym when a champion prizefighter just strolled in. "What's up with your mouth, Banjo?" He lost a tooth, Mr. Brown, said another voice, and sniggered. Lost a tooth, Mr. Brown, said the thunder that was Banjo. Keep your eyes on the road, Ernie, said Tea Time beside him. We don't want an accident, do we? The road was deserted, despite the bustle of the city behind them and the bulk of the university nearby. There were a few streets, but the buildings were abandoned, and something was happening to the sound. The rest of Ankh-Morpork seemed to be very far away, the sounds arriving as if through a thick wall. They were entering the scorned little corner of Ankh-Morpork that had long been the site of the university's rubbish pits and was known as the Unreal Estate. Bloody wizards, muttered Ernie automatically. I beg your pardon, said Tea Time. My great-grandpa said we used to own property around here. Low levels of magic, my arse. Ha, it's all right for them wizards. They got all kinds of spells to protect 'em. Bit of magic here, bit of magic there. Stands to reason it's got to go somewhere, right? There used to be warning signs up, said the neat little voice from behind. Yeah, well, warning signs in Ankh-Morpork might as well have good firewood written on them, said someone else. I mean, stands to reason. They chuck out all the old spell for exploding this, and another one for twiddling that, and another one for making carrots grow. They finish up interfering with one another. Who knows what they'll end up doing, said Ernie. Great-grandpa said sometimes they'd wake up in the morning and the cellar would be higher than the attic. And that weren't the worst, he added darkly. Yeah, I heard where it got so bad you could walk down the street and meet yourself coming the other way, someone supplied. It got so's you didn't know what was bum or breakfast time, I heard. The dog used to bring home all kinds of stuff, said Ernie. Great-grandpa said half the time they used to dive behind the sofa if it came in anything in its mouth. Corroded fire spells starting to fizz, broken wands with green smoke coming out of them, and I don't know what else. And if you saw the cat playing with anything, it was best not to try and find out what it was, I can tell you. He twitched the reins, his current predicament almost forgotten in the tide of hereditary resentment. I mean, they say all the old spell books and stuff was buried deep, and they recycle the used spells now, but that don't seem much comfort when your potatoes start walking around, he grumbled. My great-grandpa went to see the head wizard about it, and he said... He put on a strangled nasal voice, which was his idea of how you talked when you got an education. Oh, there might be some temporary inconvenience now, my good man, but just you come back in 50,000 years. Bloody wizards. The horse turned a corner. This was a dead-end street. Half-collapsed houses, windows smashed, doors stolen, leaned against one another on either side. I heard they said they were going to clean up this place, said someone. Oh, yeah, said Ernie, and spat. When it hit the ground and ran away. And you know what? You get loonies coming in all the time now, poking around, pulling things out. Just at the wall up ahead, said Tea Time conversationally. I think you generally go through just where the pile of rubble by the old dead tree, although you wouldn't see it unless you looked closely, but I've never seen how you do it. Here, I can't take you lot through, said Ernie. Lifts is one thing, but not taking people through. Tea Time sighed. And we are getting on so well. Listen, Ern, you will take us through, or and I say this with very considerable regret, I will have to kill you. You seem a nice man, conscientious, a very serious overcoat and sensible boots. But if I take you through... What's the worst that can happen, said Tea Time. You'll lose your job, whereas if you don't, you'll die. So if you look at it like that, we're actually doing you a favour. Oh, do say yes. Ernie's brain felt twisted up. The lad was definitely what Ernie thought of as a toff, but he seemed nice and friendly, but it didn't all add up. The tone and the content didn't match. Besides, said Tea Time, if you haven't been coerced, it's not your fault. If you've been coerced, it's not your fault, is it? No one can blame you. No one could blame anyone who'd been coerced at knife point. Oh, well, I suppose if we're talking coerced, Ernie muttered. Going along with things seemed to be the only way. The horse stopped and stood waiting, with the patient look of an animal that probably knows the route better than the driver. Ernie fumbled in his overcoat pocket and took out a small tin, rather like a snuff box. He opened it. There was glowing dust inside. "What do you do with that?" said Tea Time, all interest. "Oh, you just take a pinch and throw it in the air, and it goes twang, and it opens a soft place," said Ernie. "So you don't need any special training or anything?" You just chucks it at the wall, and there it goes twang," said Ernie. "Really? May I try?" Tea Time took the tin from the resisting hands and threw a pinch of dust into the air in front of the horse. It hovered for a moment, then produced a narrow, glittering arch in the air. It sparkled and went twing. "Ah," said the voice behind them. "Isn't that nice, eh, Aunt Davy?" "Yeah, all pretty sparkles." "And then you just drive forward?" said Tea Time. "That's right," said Ernie. "Quick, mind, it only stays open for a little while." Tea Time pocketed the little tin. "Thank you very much, Ernie. Very much indeed." His other hand lashed out. There was a glint of metal. The carter blinked, and then fell sideways off his seat. There was a silence from behind, tinted with horror and possibly a little terrible admiration. "Wasn't he dull?" said Tea Time, picking up the reins. Poor Ernie. I think I've got to go for today. It's probably time for my lunch, but thank you for joining me. Sorry for the interruption. We were just making plans for Christmas, to be honest, but it was very important at the time. I'm sure you understand. Hope to see you again next time I have the opportunity. Maybe tonight, maybe even tomorrow, if everyone falls asleep after eating too much. We'll see. Have a good Christmas, and see you soon.